Because I think sometimes people think the Somme Museum is just about the First World War, but actually our collection's a lot wider reaching than that. So I want to show that in this presentation today. So the Somme Museum, for those that don't know, the museum itself is a fully accredited independent museum that opened in 1994. It was primarily as an education facility to examine Ireland's role in the First World War, and again with special reference to the local cross community involvement of the three Irish divisions that were raised in Ireland at the time of the First World War, which was the 36th Ulster Division, the 10th Irish Division, and the 16th Irish Division as well. The museum is a unique visitor attraction of international significance, which shows the awful reality of war and the effects that it has on the community, mostly at home, and the effects that war, the far-reaching effects that war did have. And this is just some of the slides show what the museum has to offer. The museum has increasingly focused on the community relations potential of our shared history as a vehicle to further cross-community understanding and reconciliation. And people can come and go on guided tours of the museum itself, the museum experience as we call it, or people can just come down and see special exhibitions, or they can just come and walk around. There's open parts of the museum that people can wander around as well. Unfortunately, at the moment, like most places and all other museums were closed, but we've still been doing a lot of online work and also on social media as well. So I'd mentioned earlier that the Somme Museum, a lot of people sometimes think that the museum, because of the word Somme, that and the word Somme Museum, people think we're only a First World War collection, but we're not. We've been gathering over part of the museum remit as under our auspices of the Northern Ireland Museums Council. We also have a collecting policy that has expanded into the Second World War and also other modern international conflicts. And just in this image here, you can see, and I'll mention these a wee bit later on about some of the resources that we have here at the museum relating to World War II. But in this slide, you can see Voices of the D-Day veterans there, which is not just it's men and women, it's right across. It's ranging from all the different sections, whether it be RAF, military, infantry, through to naval as well, and also SOE, that's the Secret Services, intelligence, and the Home Front and the Home Guard as well. The bottom left-hand corner is a model of Colditz Castle, because again, we did an exhibition here in the museum that looked at, because again, it's very hard to find a conflict throughout the world that there hasn't been an Irishman or Irish woman involved in. And that's what the museum is all about, is telling the story of the Irish soldier and the Irish men and women abroad in international conflicts. So you can see from that, but I'll look at that resource later on as we get through the presentation. I want to look particularly at one very important resource that we have in the Somme Museum that we haven't really done much. We haven't promoted very much because we haven't done much about it ourselves. We have over 17,000 records, they're paper records that relate to what's known as the UVF Patriotic Fund. Now, that the name in itself sometimes provokes people to think that it's something linked to modern day, but it's actually the UVF of 1912 to 1913. And this is a unique set of documents held in the Somme Museum that provide a great insight into the needs of service families after the war and the role of that patriotic fund and it played in supporting the families, the service personnel that came home, who had maybe fell on hard times. And that's what this fund was about. The fund was initially established by the leaders of unionism to provide compensation for those in the UVF who were injured or were killed in any resistance that was in the imposition of Home Rule. And that's looking at the Home Rule period of 1912-1913. This fund was established to raise funds to look after them if anything happened to them. But the fund itself really developed after the outbreak of the First World War. So it's only really the UVF Patriotic Fund for its first couple of years of its inception. and then that changes. So, following the outbreak of the war, the fund was used for more practical purposes. And the slide that you can see here, the image that I have put, is one of the top pieces of the paper. There are A4 sheets of paper. Sometimes in each file, you might find one record, but you might find six, seven, eight pieces of paper that could hold unique and a unique insight into this period of our history, and particularly from a social point of view, what was happening in Ireland at the time, and particularly locally, and the hard times where people were falling on. I think we've also got to remember that this was a time when there was no social fund. There was people weren't able to get the same unemployment benefit or sick benefit, and there just wasn't the same support network as we would know of today. And this is where this fund was really invaluable, particularly to those service personnel who had come home and were finding it really difficult. So the image, as you can see, is just the top of one of the papers that says confidential. All these papers contain confidential information that related to the soldier, and we're very careful in handling these documentation as well of what information that you give out from them, because some of them do contain some very sensitive material. Sometimes they will record things, and again, we aren't here to judge because we don't know what it was like for the families over 100 years ago. But sometimes you'll see things like drunkard, layabout, didn't work. And alternatively, you'll see things like kept a very tidy house, excellent worker, good references. So you just have to be very careful when you're accessing this type of archive. This is just an image here that shows the soldiers. One of them, you can see here some of the disabilities that these men had to cope with when they did come home from war. Particularly, it was a war that saw a lot of loss of limbs. And you can see a soldier there who's lost both his legs and in a wheelchair, and one that's on crutches who's lost one of his legs. But again, look at the smiles. They're still happy. They found something that they can actually smile about. The fund was supported, that actually was set up to support returning soldiers who had fell on hard times, severely injured, bereaved widows, their next of kin, and also their dependents. As I said, there was no social benefit systems existing at the time, so must be said also that this fund did not discriminate on religious backgrounds. Religion was not one of the requirements that you had to fill in on the application form. So when the fund changed its name from being the UVF, the Ulster Volunteer Force Patriotic Fund, it changed then to being the Ulster Division Patriotic Fund. That's due to, as I said, to the outbreak, because of the outbreak of the First World War. It made the fund change in itself. And what you have here is a fund then that develops as the needs of the community, as the needs of the returning service personnel changed as well. Many of the soldiers didn't return home, and the families had lost. You could have a widower with maybe 3 to 4 to 5 children, and she had no means of supporting them. She'd lost the main breadwinner, and they could apply to this fund for very important needs. My own grandmother, my great grandfather was killed in the First World War, and my grandmother applied to the Ulster Patriotic Fund for £5 to buy a sewing machine, because she was left a widow with 5 children, all under the age of 10. And she thought that the best way to support them was to take on her own type of business, doing sewing for other families. So that's just showing the social enterprises as well that families were having to enter into after the First World War. All creeds and classes who joined His Majesty's forces at the time in a period of great national emergency could apply to this fund. The money raised also supported the UVF hospitals that had been set up around the province, and they were set up to care for these returning soldiers as well. So they were separate from the likes of the Royal Victoria Hospital and the Mater Hospital, and what you had was the Ulster Volunteer Force hospitals at the likes of Craigavon House or at Botanic at Queen's, and they looked after these soldiers. And this fund supported the hospitals as well as supporting the veterans themselves. So I just want to, again, here you can see again where it's changed, and it's the title of it. This is the top of it. You can see it says the Ulster Patriotic Fund application form for use by discharged or disabled officers or men. After war times, it could be really tough for ex-soldiers who were injured. Unemployment was really high within Ireland at the time, and many of them encountered financial pressures. The jobs weren't there that they had promised. The country wasn't necessarily fit for kings that they had been told about when they had gone off to do their duty, that they would come home. Many of the jobs have been taken over by women as well, because the First World War was a huge time for social change for the women. And many of the women had gone out and taken over these jobs and didn't want to give them up when the men returned home. So, again, that put financial pressures on many of these men. They weren't able to just walk back into the jobs that they had given up, the steady jobs that they had before the First World War. And often veterans had to sadly pawn their own medals. It's why when people are doing research into their genealogy of their family trees, sometimes they won't be able to find the medals in their own homes relating to their relatives' service. And that's a lot of times because of the hard times the veterans fell on, and they had to pawn their medals just to get some money to pay the rent or to put food on the table. The fund did not distinguish, again, as I said, on political background. It was all about scale of need. It depended on what your need was at the time. So around this time, there was other organisations that had also been established, and there was the Comrades of the Great War Group, which had been established in Belfast in 1918. There was the Nationalist Veterans Association, which had been established in Dublin. 1919, which was to look after soldiers in the south of Ireland, and to the south who had returned home as well. And then later, by the time we get into 1921, what you see is the emergence of the Royal British Legion that we would know today. And many of these organisations then that had previously been established just merged into being the British Legion, and they looked after in turn then many of the returning veterans. And then there was the Irish Sailors and Soldiers Land Trust, which was basically homes fit for heroes. They were about building houses, and you would still see them around the province today, and also some down south as well. But you would see them in the likes of the Craigie Estate. There is the Thames Drive. There's Albert. There's just the carry the place names from the battles of the First World War. So the Patriotic Fund, you can see here, needed to raise funds as well to support it. So where did this money all come from that was all put into an endowment fund to look after them? So that it came from the landowners, the aristocracy at the time had all supported it and all had given over money to aid the Patriotic Fund. But they also then went about setting to raise their own funds. And within the Somme Museum collection, these are another two items here within our archives that are resources that we're able to use. You can see there were many methods used to raise the money for the fund and provide financial support for the UVF and the 36th Ulster Division and their dependents. And then, as I said, this spread wider afield. The UVF hospitals as well didn't just look after. It didn't matter whether you were a Protestant, Catholic, Jew, non-denominational, atheist. The UVF hospitals looked after returning veterans. It didn't distinguish either on your religious background or political background to go into the hospitals. Sometimes, again, it's that name and using this terminology makes people think that they just did, but they didn't. But there was fundraising that took place, and you can see here two such ones. There was on behalf of the UVF Patriotic Fund, there was a grand concert that was held in the Ulster Hall on the 24th of November 1916, and involved lots of male voice choirs, bands to raise money, and the programme, you can see 2p for a programme. So you'd have bought your ticket, and then you'd have brought a programme and raised funds, and the money would have gone towards supporting the veterans and also the hospitals. And you can see here this little booklet. This is a booklet that was written by Ella Porter, and it's called The Red Hand of Ulster, but it's about the history of the Ulster Division on the 1st of July and their famous attack on the 1st of July 1916. Another way they did it was in July 1918, the famous J.P. Beagle painting, which is the charge of the Ulster Division, which today you can see hanging in Belfast City Hall, was presented to the then Belfast Corporation But on top of the original print they took, the artist had 1,000 prints made, which were signed by the artist to raise funds for the UVF, for the 36th Ulster Division Patriotic Fund as well. Subscriptions raised about £100,000, and that was back then in the 1920s. So you can imagine how much that was actually equates to in today's money. I just want to look at, just to show how this is an excellent resource and what it can actually do for us here at the museum, both from a military point of view and also from a social point of view. How finding a soldier on these records can lead you down various different avenues. This is two soldiers that I'm going to look at in the next few slides that we managed. We were doing research. The family had approached us to ask us, did we have any information on their relatives, and these two records came to light, and we were able to fill in a lot of the blanks that the family had in their own family history. So this is a William McKeown, and he lived at 20 Solway Street in the Newtonards Road, Belfast. You can see from the record here that's on the left-hand side. That's what the front cover actually looks like. It records his age, his address. It also records what his marital status was, whether he was married or single. The red pen that you can see is the verification of the committee, the 36th Ulster Division, the Fund Committee, who then verified the information of the soldier's details as well and changed it if it was inaccurate or needed some changing. So that's what the red pen is as well. You can see there it also then records what was his regiment, his battalion, and also his rank. And you can see here it's saying that he served in the 8th, 9th Royal Battalion of the Royal Irish Rifles, and his rank was rifleman. The other thing it records is of interest is that it records his home service. So how long did he as a soldier spend at home? And here you can see it's 1 year and 3 months. And how long did he spend abroad, fighting abroad? And there's 3 years, 2 months there. His occupation, his pre-war occupation, you can see he was apprentice tinter, and it also tells you where he was actually working for, Victoria Tents there, and what his wage was at the time. So this is 1928. This record is taken from, so you can see what his wage was in 1928 and how that equates to today. But again, what the next sad fact is, it then says, what is he doing presently? So we know that he's unemployed. He has returned from the war, and unfortunately then has not been able to get a job again as a tinter, and he's unemployed. And he then has fell on hard times, and he's applying. He's written then what is the object of the application. He's saying what the reason is behind it. His wife has been ill for the last 5 weeks, and she has poor health, and they don't have health insurance or unemployment benefit. And this is the problem, and the benefit has run out, and could they be supported? You can see in the next bit it records the wife's details then as well, which you're not going to find in any other really on military records. And you can see that his wife's there, Janet, and she's recorded as age 27 in 1928, and she's a paneller. And then it has recorded, it says she's sick. But the Patriotic Fund then has recorded what they have when they have gone out to assess. They go out to assess the families as well, and they record those details. And you can see trouble keeping and what her problem was, and she has no sick benefit. And then it records down below what money, what finances there is already coming into the house, if any. And you can see all the money that there is that the family is having to rely on to look after the 3 of them at this point in time. It's then, which is very interesting for families, down in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see Mr. McKeown's signature, his own signature, and it's dated the 30th of July 1928. And then you would have a witness. Somebody has to give a character reference. This would sometimes be the local justice of the peace, the local minister or priest, or somebody as well who maybe owned a shop, or a doctor, somebody of stance. With a bit like when you're getting your passport, having to get somebody to sign your passport, you had to get this verified for somebody to give you a credit, a character reference as well. Within his file, Mr. McKeown's file, then we were able to find this other document, which was for his employers, who had been his employers. He had managed to get temporary employment. And the fund has written out to Workman and Clark Limited, who were a big shipbuilding industry, as you know, at the time, in the shipyard. And you can see here that they've written back of when he was able to work. and also what his wages were and what it equated to for the amount of time that he'd worked. So you can see for a week's work there, £1.6 shillings and six there you can see as well. And so it records all this further information within these records. So Mr. McKeown then sadly is taken ill, and the next time we look in the records, we see that Mrs. McKeown, Janet, has applied then to the Ulster Patriotic Fund for funds on his behalf. And you can see now we have the family has grown, and they're now the children are at Mersey Street Primary School, and there's Janet, Margaret, there's Ethel, and there's Hazel. You can see, and the ages then are recorded. And again, this record then is from 1941, so you can work out the dates from this as well, and you can see. So again, a great bit of social history that we're able to pass on to families. The families then are able to fill in their family trees from the likes of this, and you can see the reference there then from Councillor Armstrong from Consbrook Avenue as well. Now, this bit on the back is actually then recorded by the committee as well. And as you can see, I've redacted some of it because you can't show all of it, but some of the information that is there. And you can see it's a family of 5 and their total income there is 28 shillings. The application is made by his wife because the husband was, as you can see, transitional until the 28th of October and had a breakdown. Sadly, he had been suffering from what we would now call today post-traumatic stress, which would have been given the title shell shock back then. So this is 1941, so it's starting to slightly be more recognised by the authorities and by the military. But he has sadly then been admitted to Curtisburn, where he's going to be for 6 months. And this is a sad fact on this that we were able then to tell the family, but also the fact that Dr. Graham, who was his doctor at Curtisburn Hospital at the time, had informed his wife that it was going to be 6 months before he would be actually able to give his wife any further information on her husband. So it would be very hard for us to comprehend that today. And you can see that what she's looking for is food, rent and insurance. And the fund then have supported her and given her the money that she needs to carry on and continue forward looking after her 4 children and her 3 children, and herself. We then went a bit further and looked through the museum's archives, our own archives, to find that we actually had artefacts belonging to Mr. McKeown within the Somme Museum collection that then we have been able to give copies of to the family. And what we had was this here, which is very unusual to find. This is the Field medical card. This is where a soldier has been injured out on the battlefield. And the medics would put, today you would see it yourself where you would be assessed, there would be triage, and soldiers would be, or in an emergency situation, even in a civilian setup, you would be triaged and you would be a marker, or there would be something distinguishing what category you were, your wounds. Well, this was actually from the battlefield. This was out on the battlefield, and you can see the top part of the slide is the cover has survived, the paper cover with a little see-through screen, and the hole where it would have been tied with a piece of string to something around Mr. McKeown, around his wrist or around the button of his uniform, so that the medics can look at it very quickly. And the card has survived as well as the cover, and it records his number 3136, rank rifleman, Mr. McKeown, and it's recording then. The other unique thing is we now know that he has a gunshot wound, GSW, gunshot wound to his leg, and then in brackets it says L, left leg. Now that then lets us know that Mr. McKeown has received a gunshot wound, and when he received it was the date of this field medical card is the 2nd of July 1916 as well. So that is something else that's great to have here within the resources of the museum and to be able to give to the family. Along with that then, surprisingly then, we were then able to find Mr. McKeown's active service book, his soldier's pay book, which then recorded further information about him. You can see the number, the same corresponding number, details, information when he was attested into the Ulster Division on the 7th of the 11th, 1914. So we know Mr. McKeown, the war broke out on the 4th of August, so we can tell from that Mr. McKeown actually enlisted right at the very beginning of war, and he's only 19 years of age. What this records is his wages. It then, throughout the book, it records his vaccinations. We're able to tell from it what he was inoculated against, which is very something a topic today as well. That would be very much about vaccinations. But from this, we can see that as a soldier, Mr. McKeown was given all his vaccinations as well at the time before he went off. So it records lots of further information about him. Then moving through the records, there was also within it then these other pieces of information that were recorded. And here, this one is very interesting. The family of seven. It records their, and this is in the 16th of October 1941, and it records what was the full income into the family at the time. And again, this has been verified. And then it records this: the house was blitzed in May, was evacuated to Thompson's cash stores in Akadui. Got nothing at the time from the Resistance Assistance Board or from the Lord Mayor's Fund, but gets 35 shillings a week from the Bureau Payable in Ballygawley. And what has Mrs. McKeown applied for? She wants clothes. She's asked for clothes just to clothe them. And she owes the shop. You can see there she's on tick, what was called tick at the time. She owes them £2. And this was returned from the Lord Mayor's Fund at the time that had been set up for those that had been houses blitzed. And they hadn't actually received it, hadn't received any funding. They'd been turned down for funding, and she'd been told to come back to them again at a later date for more help. But the UVF Patriotic Fund actually funded the family then. And you can see here that it says that it was then sent back to the committee. And it sadly also records that her husband was now in attendance at the Royal Victoria Hospital, as well as being in Purdysburn Hospital, where he had been sent for an X-ray, and now they had discovered a growth in his stomach, and he actually had a tumour cancer, we would know today. And sadly, he was still an inmate at Purdysburn Hospital for post-traumatic stress. We now know that what actually happened was that Mr. McKeown suffered from post-traumatic stress. He was perfectly healthy, apart from the fact that he had the gunshot wound, and he also had some issues, but his post-traumatic stress was actually brought on by the Belfast Blitz, the Blitz when his house was blitzed in the Newtownards Road during the period of April when the area was blitzed, and that triggered post-traumatic stress for Mr. McKeown. And sadly, Mr. McKeown was taken in to Purdysburn Hospital and never ever got out of it again. And you can see then on the other side where the Patriotic Fund have recommended that she gets a grant for 6 weeks and they look after her until she's able. And at this stage, she's still living in Auchnacloy after the bombing. She isn't able to move back to her own home. So it's a very sad story, but something that we're able then to give families that they're able to look at. And just one other quick one then to go through to show again how this resource can be used. This is another gentleman. This is Joseph Mitchell. And Joseph lived on 18 Woodvale Drive in Belfast, but he was born in Ballymena and had moved because of his work from Ballymena up to the Woodvale Road in Belfast. He had served with the 12th Battalion, the Royal Irish Rifles, and he had enlisted again very early on in September 1914 and wasn't discharged until well after the end of the war on the 18th of March 1919. Now, this record that I have here at the time is 1962, so he was 75 years of age. These records date, what we have found so far in our research is that the records seem to start just after around 1918, 1919, and they go up. Our oldest one we have found so far is up to about 1967, 1968, before the Patriotic Fund stopped helping veterans, when you start to see other funds come into play that look after them. But Mr. Mitchell, he had worked at the shipyard. He had also worked at Kane Brothers Engineering and had done his apprenticeship there. But you can see on this, Mr. Mitchell is applying on behalf of his wife, Elizabeth Mitchell, and himself, because he's 75 years of age and she's 70 years of age. And you can see it says he worked in Killerlay Flax Spinning Mill from 1924 till 1938. Now, how did he get from the Crumlin Road, from Woodvale Drive down to Killalay. Well, we've been able to find out through the fund and through letters that he included in this that he actually cycled every day from Belfast to Killalay and cycled back again, rain, hail, and shine, and that was it for 14 years. He then, during World War II, like many men did, because the war had broke out and they needed to work in Short Brothers in Harland to actually, again, for war service, he moved from Killalay to work in Shorts because he was, the job that he had was one of those reserve services that he was actually, it was important that he was doing something. He was a turner, he was a metal turner, so he was needed. And he moved to Shorts in Harland to actually work there. But you can see that he has become ill and he ended up having to retire in 1955 due to, he actually had, which we find out later on in the records, he had amnesia, he had to get injections weekly because he had anemia. So he did. And also his wife here is ill, and it records all that and what it is that they have and they're attending hospital and what their income is coming into the family. Then uniquely and among these records, we also find these other letters relating to Mr. Mitchell as well, where he had written handwritten letters every time that he had made an appeal. He wrote his life story down. And this one here that I have put up on the screen tells about when he had joined up, his training, he records being part of the gun running at Larne. He records a bit of his war service and going off to serve. But the bit that I have circled in red is interesting, because again, when we're looking at NI 100, he mentions in here, he says, but there was more, of course, the 1921 riots of course, and on a Monday morning, crowds were heading for work down York Street when snipers opened out and a few of us were shot. Now he means shot, so it's SHAT, so he's actually put SHAT instead of shot, and I just got one bullet. Some got more. In fact, a chap got 3 in the arm and the shoulders. So we all know as well, if we look through the history of what was taking place in 1921, this is part of the riots and the pogroms that were taking place around the time. And this man, Mr. Joseph Mitchell, was actually shot in one of the incidents, and we've been able to check back as well and look at that and see. But there was that many incidents that were taking place at the time. It's hard to pinpoint the exact one, but he is saying there what his piece of information is, his testimony about his time and what took place, and he just speaks about it so matter of factly as well. On the left-hand side, you can see then the St. John's of Jerusalem, where they have written as well to the Patriotic Fund to say that this man deserves to be looked after. And the sad fact is that Mr. McKeown, in all his records and writing that he puts through at the time, is all that Mr. McKeown, and you can see it here, is looking for is a TV licence and a coat for Mrs. Mitchell. He has paid all his other debts. He has no debts. He has paid all his rent. He has paid everything else, but his savings have run out. And the one thing that is extremely important to him, and he writes this later on in his letters, is the fact that they have a rented TV. The long winter nights, they have nothing else that they can do. And this again is in the 60s. And he does this. He applies to the fund in 66, 67, and 68 for a TV licence. And basically, this is Mr. Mitchell's one request and one luxury in life. And thankfully, the Ulster Patriotic Fund actually pay for those years, pay for Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell to have a TV licence so that they can stay connected to the world. So this is really something, a really unique archive that we have, that we're able to help people with their family history. And it also fills in, you can see it's not just the military side of it, it's that social aspect as well that we're able to actually see within it. And sadly, Mr. Mitchell died in 1968. And then Mrs. Mitchell, she didn't die until the 70s. But you can see here that the fund did actually look after them in their later years in life. So, also part of the patriotic fund at the time is you can see here is the patriotic fund also raised over £14,000 came from the patriotic fund to support the building of the Ulster Tower at Feetful and to pay for the wages of the caretaker that's there as well. This is the memorial that was opened on the 19th of November 1921 to commemorate the actions of the sons of Ulster. And again, the Ulster Tower was opened and it's to represent the 9 counties at the time, which include Cavan, Monaghan, and Donegal as well. And if you look closely at the image on the screen, on the left hand side of the screen, you can see the very first custodian of the tower standing on the steps. It's just a shadow there. You can see he was a soldier who had finished, but he was in the memorial, living in the memorial there. And in among the archives and our resources, we have numerous photographs of the time in the archives. We also would have in our collection as a resource is commemoration programs. You can see the one on the right hand side there is the 50th anniversary of the Battle of the Somme in 1966, which was run by the government of Northern Ireland at the time. They ran a pilgrimage and held a ceremony. And since 1989, 1990, the Somme Association have really been responsible for all the commemoration services that have taken place at the Ulster Tower. And this year, the Ulster Tower will commemorate being open for 100 years on the 19th of November. And we are planning towards that. But within our archives and as part of our resources, we have all records of all the ceremonies that took place in France. And we would have an extensive collection of archives of photographs. We had the very first Royal British Legion pilgrimage that took place in 1928. We have photographs throughout the period of time when the soldiers returned, the veterans returned, particularly in 1966. And there is footage also in Northern Ireland Screen that we're working on at the moment with them to try and bring that footage out this year as well. And I know Northern Ireland Screen have been talking about their resources at the minute. So this is an excellent resource that links in with other organisations here within on the island that we're able to add our resources to as well. Then looking at some of the artefacts and collections that we have linked to NI 100 within the museum. Again, as I said, we're not just about the song. We do have an extensive collection that links into social history as well in the period of time. And what you can see here is the official medal that was to commemorate the opening of the Northern Ireland Parliament. You can see that in 1921, and you can see the back of it. The Northern Ireland Parliament opened on the 22nd day of June 1921, and the Prime Minister in Belfast. It says City Hall, Belfast. So the likes of these artefacts that we at the minute have been going through our collection to try and find what we have that we're able to put on display or other organisations can access to look at in this period over the next couple of years. We also then found this beautiful silk handkerchief that you can see on the left hand side that has been hand embroidered, because of course embroidery was something that was very much part of the social culture of the time, and handkerchiefs would have had your initials on it or a picture, and again you would see embroidered postcards. But this is one of the artifacts that we have, is a silk handkerchief that has been done for the opening of Parliament or Northern Ireland, the 22nd of June 1921, and you can see it there. And the colours in it have survived beautifully into today. And then on the right-hand side, you can see a more modern medal that was brought out for the Jubilee of Northern Ireland in 1971. And you can see the top of it is the Bible and Crown, and the bottom is Parliament buildings, the Stormont and Carson statue. Sadly, it hasn't, because it's so shiny, it hasn't really come out too well in this image, but it is a beautiful enamelled badge that we have there within the collection. But we have for a few other anniversaries that have taken place over the period of time as well, linked to Northern Ireland within the collection. a lot of times people would donate. Everything within the Somme Museum has been donated to the museum, so we are looking after them. They've been donated to the museum to look for people for future generations. I have to say it's great that we have been able to go and get some of these artifacts out of the collection, and will be able to use them in the next couple of years going forward. Also, then for linked to NI 100 Museum Archives is we have here the official programme from His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales visit on the 16th to the 18th of November 1932. This is when Stormont was actually opened itself, and this is the official visit that the King took place. And inside this booklet, it records everybody that was in attendance, what events the Prince of Wales attended from the 16th to the 18th, who he met. It has excellent resources within inside it that you can look at and see. It even gives the exact routes. It shows you the routes he took and who was in each car, who was in car 1, car 2, car 3 on the procession that took place from place to place. So this is a beautiful archive or artifact that we have at our fingertips here as a resource in the museum. Attached to that then is this medal as well, rosette, that was issued at the time for anybody that had attended it. And we have one of them. You can see the blue silk rosette, and it says the opening of Parliament in 1932 of Northern Ireland. And that's something else, as I say, that links in with this whole event that took place around the state opening of Parliament buildings on our history that's connected there for NI 100. Then inside it, you have these beautiful images that today, anybody that's been up in the Stormont, it looks very different into Parliament buildings than it does now in these. And you can see the Great Hall one. Of course, there's no statues, there's no portraits in the wall, so it's a very empty Great Hall. But this is a photograph that was taken, that is there in the archives, that was taken just prior to the opening, so it was empty. It's before, it's just it's brand new and ready to be opened, but still very recognisable for anybody that's in and out of it today. And the Commons, as it was called then, you can see there, sadly then there had been the fire within Stormont and things were changed, but this is one that was taken, an image that was taken from 1932 and shows what it was like. And then we also have within the collection some more modern day artifacts that would be linked to NI 100. And here we have a signed covenant that was brought out for the anniversary in 2002. And this one you can see that we have in our collection is signed by Billy Hutchinson and David Irvine. And again, I actually see that this has been reissued this year online, that people can sign it for the 100th anniversary this year. But we have in the collection here in our archives this one that had been issued in 2002, and also, as I say, with the signatures there that is on it, that is in the museum's collection. I mentioned at the beginning about our World War II archives, and this again is something I think sometimes people don't realise that we have a collection here within the museum. And this again is just, and it'll be we would have for the 3 services. We would have for the Army, the Navy, and for the RAF, for the Air Force as well. And here you can see it's again personal letters. This is a telegram sadly to Mrs. Yard, who's being informed in confirmation of the War Office telegram dated the 25th of April 1945. I regret to have to inform you that, and it's dated the 23rd of April 1945, has been received by telegram from the military authorities in the central Mediterranean that your son, Lieutenant R.L. Yard, Royal Artillery, has been wounded. No particulars as to the nature of the wound or the name of the hospital to which your son has been admitted have been furnished. If, however, he becomes seriously ill as a result of his wounds, further reports will be received by telegram. So this goes on. So what you have here is a very personal letter to the family, informing a mother that her son has been injured, and that's all she knows. And that's the lifeline. These pieces of paper were the only thing that families actually had to know if their loved ones had been injured, and they didn't know how badly they were injured or whether they would actually survive. I'm pleased to say that Lieutenant Yard did survive, because on the other side we then have his officer's release book as well, which shows his disembarkation and his dispersal unit at Aldershot. So this is then showing where he is finishing his time with the in service, and he then is. This is his book, his army book, that shows what he is going through before he leaves the army, and we have that within the Somme Museum collection as well. As part of the Second World War collection, we would also have artefacts linked to the services at home. That would be the likes of the Home Guard, or Dad's Army, as we would know it, particularly from the TV programme. But this is the Home Guard and the Ulster Home Guard, and we would have some records relating to that. And this is in the years when our country was in mortal danger. Thomas Gilman, who served with from the 14th of November 1942 to the 31st of December 1948, gave generously of his time and powers to make himself ready for her defence by force and arms, and with his life if need be. So again, these are excellent resources for families who want to try and be finding their family history or genealogy as well, and putting their family tree together. So we would have an extensive collection today relating to the Second World War. One extensive collection we have in the Somme Museum as well is our oral history collection, our oral archives, which thankfully were funded for us back at the very beginning when we started them by the Heritage Lottery Fund, as it was then. And they funded us to carry out this programme that we still continue today, even though the funding has ceased. It is a legacy. This programme has continued from 2002 right up to modern day, and it has been an extremely important collection to have in the Somme Museum. And I'm pleased to say it's also been deemed by the British Museum, the British Libraries, an extensive collection of significant importance, that we're now having it digitalised as well. But what we would have is over 500 oral archives, collections within our archive. They relate to when the Somme Association started, the ones that we did with the First World War veterans. We would have probably at the moment, we have about 12 First World War veterans, one female veteran, and the rest would be all males. And that would be various ranging from, there's a couple of them are video, there would be, most of them are they're all transcripts, and some of them would be video recorded, but the majority of them are all just their voices are actually recorded, because at the time back in the 90s when that project was done, we didn't have the same equipment to do it. But thankfully, when we were funded by the Heritage Lottery, it was all done on different equipment. And we now have the biggest extensive collection of Second World War voices. You can see there, as I showed it earlier, the D-Day voices. We were able to pull it out for different conflicts as well. So there would be Second World War ranging from the whole way through the archives that you can access, as I said earlier on, male, female, north, south, and also then there would be the home front. We then received further funding from the lottery, Heritage Lottery, to then, after we'd finished our Second World War project, to do the home front. And that was looking at things like smuggling, social issues, what was taking place, what it was like for children, rationing, all of that. So again, as I say, there's over 500 oral archives in our Second World War and home front collection. We were then very fortunate to get further funding from what was known as the IEST, which is the Royal British Legion Fund. We were able to then, about 4 years ago, go and do a project in the south of Ireland as well, to interview veterans in the south of Ireland who had served in the services. And that then has meant that it's a complete All-Ireland collection as well, All Island of Ireland collection of these veterans. We also then, within the collection, we would have soldiers that served in Burma. We also interviewed veterans from the Korean War, and we have some of those veterans. Sadly, we're down to about 2 Korean War veterans left alive here in the province, but we have interviewed about 20 within that project related to the Korean War. And we also took some of the veterans back to Korea in 2013 as well. We would also have miscellaneous in there, which would be other things that we would have deemed would have been of importance, or people of significant importance that we felt that we should have interviewed to get their oral testimonies down. So there would also be some that is miscellaneous. So there is a record there of all this archive, and people can access it, and it has been used by local media and also for other events, and people, and particularly the BBC, has made use of it over the years as well. Another thing then that the Somme Museum do is, and the Somme Association, we would do outreach, and at the minute a lot of it would be online. We can do talks, presentations, we go out to various different groups, and we can deliver presentations on various different subjects as well. So that's a resource that we're able to do, and we've changed it from being face-to-face like most people have at the moment because of COVID. And hopefully in the future we'll be able to go back to doing it as face-to-face. But at the minute, that is available for us to do to historical societies and groups. And we will do, as I say, presentations on various different topics. You can see here, it's the Irish in the Battle of the Somme, 2 divisions. And then the other one is women in the Great War. So there is talks there that can be done. Our education programme at the Somme Museum, the education of our children plays an important role in the process of constructing tolerant and inclusive societies. And this is based on a deep understanding of our past. We're great believers and have a very strong educational programme here in the museum to try and educate the future generations of the sacrifices of our forefathers. And that's where these collections and these resources and artefacts really come into their own, to be able to show, you can see there, these young people able to see items not just in cabinets, but we were able to bring them out of the cabinets so they can actually hold them. So they're touching living history as well. And that is why such places like the Somme Museum and the resources that we hold are so important. And we really do strive to keep the memory alive for the future generations as we move forward. Our online educational resources, these are things that in the future we're working on at the moment, and that we've been readapted. We've adapted because of COVID, and we are working towards putting our educational programs online. We have put some of them online, but we are working towards putting more online, such as we are developing at the moment a series of, thanks to our funding from the Executive Office from TBUC, we are developing a series of animation films that will be aimed at Key Stage 1, 2 and 3. We also have been putting together some videos of a virtual video of the Somme Museum, and that's gone out through. We have done that in cooperation with the Good Relations within Ards and North Down Council, and that will soon be available to schools as well within that project. And we're also putting together online workshops, because again, even though we're hopefully on the route to opening up again in the near future, it might be a while before schools have the confidence to come back into museums again. So we have to be very conscious of that and aware of having our resources online, so that the schools can, and community groups and other groups as well, can access and feel confident to access our artefacts and resources, to use them as we move forward into the future. When we are open and able to open, the other thing that the museum has here as a resource is our conference facilities, and we're able to run events within the museum. Our main hall seats up to 30 or 232, and that would be with full wheelchair access as well. And it means we're able to hold events for ourselves, but also for other organisations. We also have the space within the museum to do breakout sessions and also for catering. So that's something as well that is a resource the Somme Museum has at their disposal, and that other groups, we welcome other groups to actually access us as a facility to do that. And again, we work very hard, we strive very hard to make the museum a shared space as well, where everybody feels that they can actually come and feel safe and secure within. The Somme Museum, as I mentioned, then we literally within the museum would have been exhibitions, display areas. You can see here, this is one we put on the armistice, the end of the war for 1918. We opened it in 2018. It was our last major exhibition. And it's looking at the after effects and many of the things that came out of the second or out of the First World War and led into World War II. At the minute, then we're working towards virtual exhibitions. Again, looking to the future that we adapt, that we will be able to do static exhibitions, but they're exhibitions that can very easily also be put onto virtual exhibitions that groups can access them and visit them virtually as well, in case people don't feel that they're able to go out. And just coming to the end of the presentation, because I'm aware of our time restraints, this is what we plan to be doing as our outreach presentations into the developing in the future. Again, this is, we have been working with our funders, which is through, again, our TBUC and also through the Department for Communities. And we have developed and in the process of developing 3 new presentations that we're going to be able to deliver. And again, these can be delivered either online like this, or they can be delivered in person when it's safe to do so again. And the 3 new topics are the red hand and the shamrock. That's looking at 2 symbols that actually have major crossovers. I'm actually doing a pilot talk on that one for the Good Relations Council in Ards and North Down in March, just to see how it goes. So that's one of the new ones that we are developing. And another one is an introduction to the British Indian Army and Khuda Khan, who was awarded a VC. And this presentation is looking at about breaking down the barriers around racism as well. And this is looking at how the British Army relied extremely heavy on the likes of the Indian Army, so that they had the support, as in the Labour Corps, and that's something. And Khuda Khan was awarded, is the first Indian VC as well, so he was awarded a Victoria Cross, the highest possible award that is given, and he was awarded that, and we're going to be telling his story. And one of the other presentations we will be doing is the partition of Ireland, and using some of the records and resources that we have here within the Somme Museum to do that and to look at those presentations as we move forward. So I just like to say thank you very much for giving me the time today to show some of the resources that the Somme Association and the Somme Museum have at our disposal that are here for other organisations to come and access, or members of the public, and to work with other groups as well. We have social media that people can follow us on. We have a very active Facebook page, which we're very proud of. And actually, November last year, we hit our highest ever. We had 228,000 hits in a 28-day period. We would have nearly 19,000 regular visitors to our Facebook page. But on some occasions, or when we look at the analysis of it, particularly during lockdown, we've been very active with our social media because of the way things are, and trying to unlock our collections. And we managed to achieve over 200,000 hits on some of the artifacts that we were putting up on our Facebook page. We also then put them up on Instagram and also on Twitter.